Cecil Johnson with Perceptyx is going to be our moderator. She will be joined by several thought leaders from Merck, Equinix, BASF, and Johnson & Johnson. I'll let you guys self-introduce. I don't want to eat into your time, and I'll let Sarah kick things off and get started. Thank you guys so much.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you to all the panelists who have elected to join us today. We really appreciate your time and your contribution. You know, we titled this session "The New Rules of Engagement and Transformation," and you know what? I love a title that can lead us in a lot of different directions. You know, as I met with the members of the panelists, we kind of talked about how we were going to structure this. We knew we wanted to talk about all of the challenges that our organizations had been facing, whether that's the shift to remote work, how we've had to rethink manufacturing within organizations, how there has been a shift in consumer demand or revenues or profits or whatever. But we also wanted to talk about how our HR organizations were supporting and even leading that transformation within the organization. There were so many things that we wanted to talk about, how that happens. How does HR help leaders? How do they coach managers and leaders to help them lead that transformation? How do we solve those problems? And of course, how have all of these changes impacted the relationships that these organizations and leaders have with employees? So when we talk about engagement, we wanted to keep the definition broad. We wanted to talk about, of course, employee engagement and what has been the impact of the pandemic on that level of engagement and what our organizations are doing to engage employees. But we also wanted to talk about how HR has engaged with leadership to drive change within the organization. Now, transformation, of course, means how all of our organizations have adapted to all the things that 2020 has thrown at them. But we also wanted to be able to talk about how HR has transformed itself to support the organization. How has HR been agile to address these changes? So I'm excited to have all of these panelists. They come from different industries, different parts of the country. So it's going to be very interesting to hear these different perspectives. And of course, we want to hear your questions as well. So feel free at any time to enter those into the chat, and we will intersperse them into the conversation. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to give their name, what their role is at their company, and tell us a little bit about your organization. And Cecil, I'm going to start with you since you are next to me in the panel.
Sure, no problem. Hello, everyone. My name is Cecil Johnson. I work for Johnson & Johnson. No relation to Johnson & Johnson and no relation to Sarah. And I'm responsible for our North America talent development. And Johnson & Johnson is the largest, most comprehensive healthcare company in the world. And we focus our efforts on changing the trajectory of health for humanity in the spaces of medical device, pharmaceuticals, and consumer.
Thank you. Heidi, you're next.
Hi, everyone. Heidi Gerhard. I lead talent strategy for BASF. We are a global chemical manufacturer headquartered in Germany with a focus on really creating chemistry for a sustainable future. My role encompasses all things culture, employee engagement, talent development, our leadership pipeline and succession efforts, as well as OD and change, talent acquisition, and workforce analytics. In addition to my day job, I actually moonlight as a project leader for our Future of Work initiative, and I co-lead our inclusion action plan because D&I is very closely connected into that talent strategy.
Thank you. Maria, you're up.
Hey, everybody, and I am Maria Wayne. I'm Vice President of Talent Management and Mobility for Equinix. Equinix is about 10,000 people company, very global, that is a digital infrastructure provider. Suffice it to say that 95% of all internet traffic goes through us, through our data centers and our connections, and a lot more in terms of private clouds and private connections. The noteworthy thing about Equinix is that we have had, this is our 72nd consecutive quarter of growth.
Wow.
So it's a very interesting environment to be in.
Absolutely. And last but never least, Theresa.
Hi, everyone. I'm Theresa Zeller, and I lead global learning experiences for Merck. Merck is a leading global biopharmaceutical company known as MSD outside of the United States and Canada. And we're focused on inventing for life, bringing forward medicines and vaccines for many of the world's most challenging diseases. And we operate with our customers in more than 140 countries with an employee base of over 70,000, which will be transforming as we're transforming. And we'll talk a little bit about that in this discussion.
Yeah, and absolutely. And for those of you who didn't hear me on this last session, my name is Cecil Johnson. I'm the Vice President of Enterprise Surveys and Analytics at Perceptyx. Perceptyx is a firm that focuses on people analytics. How do you listen to your employees? How do you take that information, mix it with everything else that's going on in your organization to help you understand the way forward? All right, so Theresa, I am going to start with you. Now, when we had our conversation a week or so ago, you described transformation that was already underway at Merck, and then the pandemic hit. So can you tell us a little bit more about that transformation, how Merck has engaged employees and leaders in that, and how the kind of the unplanned element of COVID may have shifted or accelerated some of that transformation?
Yeah, I'm happy to, Sarah. Thank you. In 2019, Merck actually announced and communicated a new strategy for the company. And it was really focused on 6 strategic actions: to reinvent our discovery research, to leverage digital and data, probably like most of us, to accelerate our talent, to transform our operating model, and to reshape our portfolio and our leading critical policy. So one of the most visible transformations and actions out of this new strategy was the spinoff of a new company, Organon. And the goal of this was to create 2 independently and strong companies and allow both of those companies to prioritize investments around our best growth driver for today's patients, as well as really promising pipeline opportunities for tomorrow's patients. So what does that mean? It means about 10,000 individuals moving and starting up a wholly new organization. It means our engaging our organization around what that means for those that move to Organon, for those that remain at Merck or MSD outside of the US and Canada. What remained consistent was our mission, right? To save lives and improve our patients' lives. But wow, the way we're going to work is going to be very different in both companies as we start to chart the course for the future. So how did we start to think about that transformation and preparing and engaging our employees? Well, one of the very first things we did was think about what are the critical mindsets, behaviors that must be true for us to be successful as we navigated this period of tremendous transformation, as we stood up 2 companies to be wholly successful. And we really focused in on 6 ways of working that were going to help us to do that. So that became, I think, a place where we started really ensuring that we could engage through leader development, through leader employee discussions, through self-assessments, through pulse surveys, through communication campaigns, through social learning and community chats, learning resources, multifaceted ways that we looked to engage the organization to really get ready. And each of those things either focused specifically on the transformation or change, because there were multiple transformation teams, or more specifically on those behaviors. So all that's going and going fairly well. And then COVID hits, and I'm guessing like many people, many of my esteemed colleagues on the panel, we went, oh no, what do we do, right? So now how do we keep pace with this transformation that has a target date, that 2 companies are going to need to operate independently? How do we keep pace with that in a world where we're now virtual, we're now operating virtually, yet some of our essential workers, plants and labs are still very much on site? And so we really started looking at, and I'll just quickly highlight 2 things, because what ended up happening, and I think we'll hear some similar stories, is that COVID actually accelerated our digital transformation. It accelerated our our movement towards a hybrid working model. And I was hearing some of your comments, Sarah, in the last discussion, right?
Mhm.
So for example, it increased the need, this need and this comfort that we've had historically with everything being face-to-face. People coming to big sessions, people grouping together. How do we start to think about better use of our resources and how can we get work done? Maybe not always bringing everyone together. And so it's really stimulated our thinking about virtual capabilities. The second thing for a very site-based culture was about the way that we think about when we come back, how might we think about work and collaboration and where that might be in a way that had us starting to think very differently about the way that we could open up to a talent first, not necessarily thinking that talent had to come from around a site, but that we could be starting to think about the doors that open across the globe in terms of talent. So those were some of the two big ones. And then the last one was obviously with the societal unrest in the US that led to a tremendous acceleration in our diversity and inclusion, which really started to, again, open those conversations and doors with leaders, managers, employees.
Right.
I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, listen, that's enough. And you highlighted, I think, which is very important, the importance of being agile, to be able to, you know, once something unexpected happens, not just say, well, we've got to continue on the course that we're on, but to say, okay, how do we do it differently? And how do we pivot to accommodate this new wrench that has been thrown into the works? You know, Maria, you know, technology companies are always changing, it seems to me, because the marketplace changes so quickly. I know Equinix is going through a lot of transformation itself. How has HR engaged people leaders to drive that change within the organization?
That's a great question. I was just reflecting, listening to you, Theresa, as you're describing the digital transformation at Merck. So we're kind of, Equinix is looking at it from both perspectives. One is, you know, enabling companies like Merck to deliver the amazing innovations that they're doing for mankind, for humanity. You know, and we're a player, right? We provide infrastructure and enable internet. But then what we realized, especially to your point with COVID accelerating digital transformation, what became super clear is that while since the founding of the company, we've been at the center of every major technology sea change, now we really have stopped being just the company that, you know, runs data centers. We are finding ourselves well, in need, and frankly speaking, in the middle of this giant leading digital transformation for our customers, but also we need to rethink our own company. So that's, I guess that's the background to the question. And one of the things that we're realizing, Sarah, is a lot of times what companies do is they announce the change, and there is a little bit of this assumption that leaders will change themselves. But, you know, I've been in the business for like over 20 years, and I actually see that happening quite rarely, because typically people will keep doing what got them successful. And so where I stand and what we're driving at Equinix is very explicit formulating of our leadership brand with the messaging. I'll explain what I mean. Up to now, we really leaned in and rewarded and promoted and hired and, you know, thanked leaders who were super collaborative and excellent in relationship building. What we're finding right now, that while this is still key and non-negotiable for us, we absolutely need to take words out of your mouth, Sarah, to pivot towards agile. And so extensive work, including people who are experts at this externally with marketing. What we've done is we took a stand in reformulating our leadership brand And which, to give you an example, what it sounds like, we need transformational leaders inside Equinix. We hire, reward, et cetera, promote, and grow transformational leaders who excel at driving bold and meaningful change at scale and across multiple dimensions, from personal change to global. And of course, it's telling and formulating is just first step. It's an important step, but it's just the first step. And then the work from there is, even before we go to competencies, is formulating some of the key behaviors that we're looking for in our leaders, such as inspire people to believe in what they cannot yet see, draw courage from purpose, have empathy for change makers, act boldly to make an impact, and unlock personal potential of your teams. Granted, as where we all know, there's also a lot of programmatic changes and process changes that we're realigning to that. But the most important, the foundation is in place. It resonates with our employees. It resonates with leaders, but equally importantly, it resonates with our board and stakeholders who see that this change and pivot in leadership behaviors will deliver on the strategy. Of course, that's just one thing. We also do, we're creating communities of change, and we're enabling leaders to hold quarterly conversations, to engage with their teams. But I'm going to pause because I'm really curious to hear from other panelists if they have comments on this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you said about how you've had to rethink what is the role of leadership and management within the organization. And I think you're absolutely right. Every company has to rethink, how do we manage and lead in this new world? It's not the same environment that we were in a year ago. So managers have to behave differently. Cecil, I've heard some exciting stuff coming out of J&J. The FDA is saying that the vaccine works, which is great news. What's gone on at J&J? Can you share how J&J has been driving engagement during this period?
Sure. Thank you, Sarah. And one of the things I want to do is to reframe something, and that reframe from driving engagement to growing engagement. And we say as organizations that we value our employees, but we refer to them as what we do with machines, right? We want to drive them everywhere. We want to drive engagement. We want to drive change, right? And I think it's important that if we look at them in our organizations through a lens of humans through nature, then we look at that we want to grow engagement so that everyone has a place in being able to create something that may not be there or needs to continue to flourish. So for us at Johnson & Johnson, engagement starts with culture. And even during this time of change, from COVID to racism, that has been not necessarily a change, but been more visible in popular culture now. We have always started with, where does it rest, and where does our culture play a part in making a difference? So we are disciplined in measuring how we're living up to our culture and its commitment. So we do 2 surveys, they alternate each year. One is our Cradle Survey. If you go to jnj.com, you will see our Cradle, and that is important to us. And we have 4 paragraphs, and we survey against the 4 paragraphs to see how we're living up to them. Our second paragraph focuses on employees, their development, and inclusion also. And then on the odd years, what we do is that we focus on our voice, where we get more deeper into inclusion, strategic alignment, collaboration, energy, engagement, all those things. So we are rigorous in that. And what happens is that the growing of engagement comes from when we get those results, we're transparent about them at every level. And then we aren't forcing people to put plans against them from the ground up. We're creating space for them to put plans against them. And that's really important, that we don't have an engagement division, right? Everyone owns that. And as a part of that, especially when you look at when it came time to really respond, not only to COVID, but respond to what was happening around social unrest, around racism. We had tremendous response from employees of wanting to get engaged. So they got engaged and they put plans in place and they impacted on their local level, internally and externally, to make a difference. So part of that is around empowerment, creating a space, but also removing barriers, bureaucratic, structural barriers, so that people can make a difference in bringing the organization together, but also fulfilling their own needs that ultimately impacts what we're trying to do at Johnson & Johnson, which is really impact health and impact humanity.
That's terrific. And I love that reference to growing engagement, because the natural follow-up to that is that organizations need to nurture that engagement. Just as, when you're nurturing a seedling into a plant, you've got to take care of it, you've got to feed it, you've got to make sure that everything is there. And Cecil, you made a point that Theresa made as well, and I think it's probably true for every panelist. You've got to be willing to change everything except what is at your core. So it's the credo at J&J, it's the mission, it's the mission at your organization, Theresa, but be willing to rethink kind of how everything else gets done. Heidi, BASF, like a lot of companies, has had its own transformation journey. How have you leveraged employee engagement in the journey to this transformation? And what did the pandemic alter, or did it alter anything in how you, in your approach?
Yeah, great question. So we've been on a growth strategy since 2018, really focusing from shifting the organization from a more command and control, very process heavy, complex organization to one that's much more agile, innovative, empowered, and really shifting from, our products sell themselves to how do we deliver true value to our customers. And, being a 155-year-old chemical manufacturer, that's no small feat. We're global, we're complex. There's a lot of ingrained ways of working and processes and systems that are really not the easiest to unravel. And so to really embrace this new strategic vision and where we needed to go, we felt that it was important that we had to start with our leaders and really arm them with the right tools to create that engaged workforce that's going to rally behind this change and bring this aspirational, high-performing culture to life. And so what we did is we first looked at engagement and we said, how do we define this within the organization? And subsequently, how do we measure it? And so internally, we broke it down into 6 areas. 3 that we view as essentially foundational. So safety and trust, developed, and rewarded. And then we build on that with 3 that are differentiating. And those 3 essentially are the difference maker between satisfied employees and truly engaged employees. And so those differentiating ones are included, empowered, and connected to a common purpose. And so from there, we focused on building our leader capability to really lead and role model this change. So we launched a new engagement survey to measure our progress against each of those 6 elements, and then we correlate the performance to our customer impact and sales. And so when we first launched this new survey, to be honest, it was incremental change at first. Our leaders tend to have a very long tenure with the organization, so they weren't as easy to pivot. It was hard for them to adjust their work styles and tendencies, and we also had the heavy processes and embedded systems that really made it inefficient for them to change how they get things done or to challenge conventional thinking. And so while our overall engagement scores were okay, we really noticed the gap. The areas of opportunity were in the inclusion and empowerment buckets. And those are really the 2 key differentiators in our mind, that the ones that were going to shift us faster to that target culture and ways of working. And so when we talk about the pandemic, interestingly enough, after a few months working virtually in 2021, similar to what Theresa shared, we saw the traditional behaviors of our leaders shift. I mean, essentially they were forced to. Their teams were virtual overnight. And we saw our employees be much more productive. They were delivering in new and innovative ways and often faster because they weren't burdened by the traditional approval paths and controls. And we saw our leaders release kind of the perfectionist, shield and really be much more engaging and empathetic and open with their teams in virtual calls and video chats.
Mhm.
And so it was at this point last May, June, that we decided to launch our Future of Work project, because we wanted to capitalize on the behavior changes, the mindset shift that was happening as a result of the pandemic, and further embed those more strongly into the fabric of BASF, rather than wait till things return to normal and then figure out how do we operate and how do we address the employee experience. At that point, we were actually concerned that the pendulum would swing back once we could physically return to the office. And because it was an accelerant for us as well, we said, how do we be more intentional about this change? And so, we're still mostly virtual now, besides our production and research employees, but we have the commitment from our executives on how they're going to role model this change within their organizations going forward. Some have committed to not have a dedicated office themselves. They said that I'm going to sit in an open seating arrangement in a touchdown station. Others have said that they're not going to require their teams to come to the office unless there is a collaboration session or a meeting with a customer. And still others have said that they're going to think differently about how they resource their business's needs. So not just reverting to the traditional way of backfilling openings in kind, but deconstructing the work to be done into tasks and really deciding the optimal mix of do I build this talent internally? Do I buy? Do I borrow? Do I rent? And how do we use this different way of thinking to drive organizational value and high performance?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. That's fascinating. And, employees are really kind of at the core of everything. And if we don't use them effectively to drive that change, the organization is, as much as we want it to change, employees need to, and managers need to buy into that. Well, before we open it up to everyone else for questions, I have one question for all of you. So if you'd like to answer, feel free, speak up. We've all talked about change and transformation within our organization, some that our companies had initiated, some that was driven by the pandemic. One of the phrases that I love that people have used about the pandemic is this notion of never let a good crisis go to waste. How have your organizations been able to take advantage of the pandemic to drive change within the organization, to drive big changes? And how has that changed the HR function within your organizations? Who'd like to go first?
I'm happy to jump in. So I just talked about how engagement is really the core of our high performing culture strategy. So what we looked at was, how do we optimize our employee experience and improve engagement? And we felt that it was really important to connect all of our people, services, and solutions more end to end within HR. So whereas previously we were more functionally siloed, we brought all services together into a global service delivery model. But even within talent and people services, HR, we brought development, leadership, talent acquisition, total rewards together more intentionally so that we can connect the value drivers and the performance measures across our teams. One thing that I think has been particularly powerful, and we'll see how this plays out over time with the data, but we aligned our employee experience with our candidate experience and our customer experience to ensure that there's consistency and authenticity across each of those. And then we're leveraging analytics to monitor and measure the effectiveness in achieving our growth strategy over time. And we use the results of that data to engage in regular conversations with our businesses so that we can continuously influence on the importance that our leaders have in actually role modeling and cultivating the right environment for change. And when we build on that with inclusion, we have a leader action and accountability work stream. And together, those two are really starting to gain some traction on our progress.
Absolutely.
I can go next.
Yeah, absolutely,
So,
Theresa.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So I think as I'm reflecting on it, Sarah, there's probably three things in which we are changing within HR to adapt to this crazy world. And one is what we realize is that we need to scale our processes. And there's a lot of work that traditionally HR has been doing that can be scaled, that doesn't need a live person necessarily. And so there is more of self-service and enablement, which is not necessarily something that was innate to our culture. So we're definitely driving big change transformation. The other piece is we're really realizing that how strategic our work is. So with transformation and with, frankly speaking, life and death situations sometimes, with real people and data centers and some of the threats related to pandemic or social unrest, we need to take care of that. And we need to also enable, the partnership and transformation of the business. So that definitely has forced all of us to grow very rapidly in terms of understanding the business, understanding the strategy. But the one where I want to spend just a little bit of time is, it's truly, sincerely the focus on people. So one example is we went from, and the importance of like really caring, really enabling folks. We went from doing employee engagement survey twice a year to doing it quarterly. And like almost moving towards continuing rather listening. We also, and maybe that's just specific to our culture, which is very relationship based, but we're investing in a lot of community building virtually. There is a lot of video production. There's a lot of kind of goofy, funny things, but they go such a long ways. With some of the, like our executives were doing their own Harry Potter movie all dressed up. And, it does sound maybe silly, but for a lot of folks in the time of pandemic, that's like the only entertainment. And it definitely, we got a lot of mileage. We're having virtual parties. We're leveraging technology to do like virtual coffee breaks to maintain the culture. And then we also really are leaning into well-being. For example, we have announced a few months ago that Wednesday is no meeting day. And we just like let people focus, and they, definitely discouraged from setting up meetings on Wednesdays. It's working great.
Yeah, I can imagine. It would work great for me. I mean, I think all of us have a bit of Zoom fatigue.
I bet. Would love to hear what others have to say.
Yeah.
Sure. I'll just kind of add this. I was trying to write down a couple of notes because there's so much, but that quote of "never waste a good crisis" is, everyone is talking about that, and I think for Johnson & Johnson, what we found was the opportunity to contribute to the solution. You mentioned earlier, Sarah, you emphasized our reconnection to what's our purpose. Our purpose is to change the trajectory for health and for humanity. So if that's the case, then what solutions can we drive? And solution is, how can we impact this pandemic in a different way? And that's what we've done and responded in kind. And you wouldn't think of Johnson & Johnson as a vaccine company, but how can we be so big and care about patients and not do something that was meaningful for the impact? At the same time, from an HR standpoint, what I was jotting down here was around what became clear was how HR monitors the relationship between the organization and its employees. And my graduate work was around employee organization relationships. So it really hit home that HR was that instrument in which the employee and the organization could connect through to really focus on how are you doing? How can we enable leaders to not only lead their people, but also to deliver results in a different context? And that was really important. And if anyone has read in different places, say that 2020 was the year of the CHRO, which is also the year of HR, because you really got to see how HR can impact organizations, not just from the business side, but also, of course, from the people side.
Absolutely. And I love this notion of creating meaning in the workplace, because that is so powerful in creating a sense of engagement, in creating a sense of community. And especially in this period of time where many of us feel like we have given up so much, our lives have changed in many ways that are not entirely possible, to feel or positive, to feel as though it's all been worth it because my company did something incredibly important. I think helps a lot. I know we have a lot of folks who are on the call who are from learning and development organizations and are thinking about how do we rethink learning and development at this particular time. How's the L&D function within your organization kept pace with all of this? You must be training people using very different technology, but are you training on new topics that were inspired by the pandemic?
I'll start off on that one, Sarah, and I think that's a great question because I think first and foremost, as one of the, I'm sure everybody found, the first wave was, oh my goodness, how do we take all of these face-to-face and flip to virtual? And so the first wave was, how do we start to create engaging virtual experiences? I think fortunately for us, we had some pretty cool virtual technology experiments underway, and we were able to start to leverage them and start to think about what does that mean as we move forward. One of them was a proof of value that we did using an AI simulation. Because we were in the process of a global learning and development transformation within the business transformation. And we were really able to prove to ourselves that we could immerse in a virtual simulation, drive productivity, engagement up, but more importantly, reduce seat time significantly. And so in a world where we're having Zoom fatigue, in a world where we saw initially when the pandemic hit, meeting times going up significantly, the day getting longer, how do we start to take and create capability, taking time out, but driving behavior shift up? And so we're really excited that that's actually forming the basis of some business cases as we start to rethink and reimagine some big parts of our capability around product and disease capability, around compliance capability, around onboarding, which I heard you sharing earlier. How do we get folks immersed when they're virtually separate? So some cool capabilities that we're playing with.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I can just add a small piece is absolutely, we really leaned in on training our managers how to spot burnout and how to support folks, which honestly, I never thought that we'd be doing that, but it's the most important skill right now. Well, one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really kind of made everyone rethink the role of the manager. It's not the same job. We do have a question from the audience. This is from Dave. He says, I was wondering how you were thinking about the day we're able to return to work. Is the goal for most of you to get everyone back into the office, or are you considering keeping some folks at home because it seems to be working so well? Anyone care to share?
So I'm part of a team that's looking at what a hybrid model might look like. And I think I heard that from some of the other panelists as well. And we are looking at what makes sense from a standpoint of productivity, health and well-being. I heard Cecil talking about that, which has been a huge focus for us. Really, managers and team members being able to arrange and negotiate some of that, but wholesale. How do we also start to think about our footprint, our real estate footprint across the globe, right? So how do we get folks ready for what it takes to manage a virtual team? How do you start to hire for that and open up doors that way? But I'll let others comment.
I have a quick comment on this one. Is we're adding questions. We're in our more frequent engagement surveys. We're just asking people to share how they feel about coming to the office, so that we're not surprised. And the way we're thinking about it is we really have to understand that we have different personas. And while we're really wanting to allow some flexibility, it's not possible for certain jobs. So we're just focusing our messaging on different personas and the business case for actually being together in the office. I don't think it's going to ever be the same the way it used to be, but there's still going to be for us a cultural component. We are a very relationship driven company. We kind of have to be together and party and see each other.
Absolutely. Well, listen, we could probably go on and on, but we are at time. So I want to thank all of my panelists for sharing what's going on in their organization and how they have reacted and been agile as an HR organization to meet the changing demands of the world. So thank you, everyone, and back to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you guys all for joining us today. I really appreciate it. I really want to encourage the group. They can send direct messages to our speakers. So if you guys want to reach out and you have some specific questions, there were some really good examples that were shared today. Not just here's how we should do it, but here's how we did it. And that's like perfect. That's exactly what we want. So I really want to encourage people, please reach out to the speakers. And I thank you guys so much. And with that, I'll let you head out and we'll welcome the next speaker. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.